Okay, well, welcome back. This is the last CEO interview session of the Biomarine Conference 2015. Joined up on stage by Mark McPartland from Stellar Biotechnologies and also by Alain Leblanc from Callista. So we've now gone full circle. Both are American, so we're now back in America. We've been going around the world and we've now come back home to this year's conference. And I think for you, Mark, this is very much home, isn't it?
So home, yes it is.
Yep, you're from here in Wilmington.
I do live in here in Wilmington, but our company is based in Port Hueneme, California.
Okay. So maybe if you could start, Mark, by just come to you first, just telling us something about your company, what your company does, and your role in the company.
Sure. So again, my name is Mark McPartland. I'm Vice President of Corporate Development with Stellar Biotechnologies. And Stellar is a unique company in that we are a commercial developer of KLH, or keyhole limpet hemocyanin, which is a key carrier protein widely used in immunotherapy. And our strategic position is to be the dominant player, or the only sustainable, scalable player to produce GMP-grade KLH for the growing field of immunotherapies that are in clinical trials today.
And maybe if you also just talk a little bit about your role in the company, what it is that you do and what your primary responsibilities are.
Sure. So my role entails predominantly the capital markets side of the business, managing the shareholder interactions. Since we are a public company, there's a lot of support or interaction with obviously the individual investors and institutional investors, as well as the investment community as a whole. So that's that aspect, the corporate messaging, positioning across all of our stakeholder base, from customers to regulatory agencies to the investors and, quite frankly, our competitors.
In terms of your company and what you do, this is science. Not everybody gets science. We were just talking about that prior to coming up on the stage. When you're talking to your investors, how do you demystify the science and translate it into something which they're going to guess and they're going to understand? What's the trick?
Well, it's really not a matter of trick. It's just having quantifiable evidence, proof, publications, and in our case, a 40-year history of the use of KLH, which is derived from a marine-sourced animal. And we pioneered the domestication of the animal, taking it into the aquaculture setting so that we could scale supply to meet potential demand, or a supply bottleneck, if you will, as drugs would reach commercial success. So demystifying the science around it, there's a wide body of science publications around its use, its effectiveness, and it's really about showing evidence of how our partners are developing, groundbreaking therapies that would meet unmet medical needs.
And when you're talking to these investors, what are the usual questions or the most common questions that they ask of you?
Sure. I think initially most people don't, including a lot of the scientific base, don't really realize the source of KLH, where it comes from. And when you start to describe that is derived from a scarce marine animal that's only found off the coast, Pacific coast waters, it becomes a much more real entity in terms of why it would be necessary to have the ability to scale, in terms of scale to meet a very high patient population indications such as Alzheimer's or other inflammatory diseases like lupus and what have you.
And you were saying over lunch that you previously worked in the capital markets, I think.
Sure. Before my work with Stellar, I spent 15 years plus working with a lot of different private entities, public companies, helping them through their whole capitalization life cycle, from pre-IPO to IPO launch, and then through into many times into an M&A position too, where the company was acquired.
here you are now on the other side of the fence. How have you found that transition?
The transition's been quite eye-opening for me in terms of really understanding what it takes to be, one, a public company in today's regulatory environment. Not only does Stellar have to deal with regulatory agencies like the FDA and other agencies across the globe in terms of our manufacturing process or our GMP grade API, but then you have to layer in the regulatory requirements it takes to be a public company, obviously the SEC and everything that coincides with that. So for me, there's a lot of work that goes into that process, ultimately to further the company in its growth long term, and access to capital is the key for most biotech companies, and your ability to access capital and give a return on that capital is even the most important.
I think you said that you've got an increasingly global business. You're starting to sell your product beyond North America into other markets. You touched on the regulatory challenges and aspects of your business. How would you compare the various regulatory regimes in terms of rigor, strength, etc.?
Well, I probably wouldn't be the best person to deal with that. Our COO, who is with me today, would be better acquainted with that process. But I do know that each country or different agency has its own similar or different set of rules. So you have to be able to meet all the requirements to either ship to that country or develop drugs within that country, and maintaining a large collection of data to meet those requirements is key. And that's really how we interact with our customers, our partners, to help them through that regulatory process.
Turning about now to strategy, what is the strategic focus going forward for your company, and where do you see the biggest opportunities?
Sure. As I mentioned early on, we see Stellar as our strategic position is to be the leading provider worldwide for GMP grade KLH as the growing field of immunotherapies continue to advance through the clinic and potentially to commercial success. As we have the only sustainable, scalable platform today with our aquaculture development program, we feel like we are ideally positioned to capture that market.
And conversely, therefore, what are the primary challenges that you face going forward?
I think the challenges are similar to any company in terms of when we are commercial in a sense that we are selling product and we do have supply agreements and we sell to a myriad of different companies around the globe. But when you're not at cash flow positive, the biggest challenge always is when does that scale tip, or how much cash reserves do you have to make sure you make that tipping point, if you will. But also, again, I state, as a public company and the regulatory environment that relates to it can be a challenge, but accessing capital is probably the biggest challenge overall.
And in terms of accessing that capital, is that an environment which is getting easier or becoming more difficult as time goes on?
It depends on where you are in your development cycle. We've had the luxury over the past 3 years to have a sizable cushion on our balance sheet, as we state publicly, 12 months plus runway to continue to develop and execute our business model. But more recently, in the biotech space in general, the capital markets continue to be quite volatile, and it does take proof, more than just proof of concept or a novel idea, to drive investors' interest. Where Stellar's positioning is, we hinge our performance or our growth opportunities on our partner success, where they are in their development of their clinical trials of their programs, phase 2, entering from phase 1 to phase 2, from phase 2 to phase 3, or late phase 3, ready to unblind for key therapies. Ultimately, our success will come with one of our partners developing and gaining approval for one of their therapies in a broad population.
Investors tend to be fairly demanding in terms of results. How do you align the reality, your reality as a business, which is it takes time to develop, investors' perspective on we want returns? How do you manage that reality?
Sure. I mean, educating the investors on what the growth cycle is, or more importantly, what the development cycle is in terms of being a biotech company, is sometimes widely misunderstood. You've heard some of the numbers thrown around over the past couple of days regarding what it takes to develop a new therapy, and quite frankly, the time, a lot of that reasoning or the rationale behind the cost associated with, of $2 billion to develop a drug is the length of time it takes. It can take anywhere from as short as 8 years to as many as 20 years to develop a new therapy, and that's quite a timeline horizon for which many investors that don't understand that to be a challenge. So with us, from a multiple opportunities, if you will, we again hinge a lot of our success on our partners' success, and we try to focus on the success that they're having with their programs, leverage that to show visibility to our shareholders, our investors, or potential investors, what the growing demand potential can be for our products.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Wish you every success, and it's a fascinating discussion we have. I never realized this is a single mollusk. It's one species type that you are reliant upon for your own product.
Correct.
Thank you very much. Alain, turning to you then. Just tell us something about Calista, what Calista does, and what the focus for your business is.
Sure. So Calista is a methane fermentation company. So our primary product is a single-cell protein, which is a microorganism that grows on methane and is a replacement for fish meal in aquaculture diets. So it's 70% protein. It's a great fit in salmon aquaculture as well as any other carnivorous species, and it's actually been validated at scale. So we acquired the assets of a company called Bioprotein, which previously developed this in Norway, and they produced over 4,000 tons of feedkind, our product, and successfully fed it to salmon and saw higher growth rates, higher nitrogen retention, and really improved gut health across the board.
You've also got a corporate finance background. You were describing that you're investment banking and then into venture capital. You did your MBA and then came into Calista. You've decided to invest your knowledge and your experience in Calista. Why did you make that personal decision to invest that in Calista?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started in biotech working for a company called LS9, which had a great technology but was a sugar-based platform. And I realized pretty quickly that if you want to make chemicals starting from sugar, it's a tough business economically, even if it isn't technically. And so there were a couple companies in the Bay Area that were looking at methane as a primary feedstock, and Calista was one of them. And the timing worked out really well, as they were growing and looking for somebody with my skill set right when I was coming out of business school.
And you said, look, this is an opportunity, this is something that I like the look of. How would you describe that opportunity now that you've been in Calista for a period of time, you're seeing the reality? What is that opportunity, and how big do you think that opportunity realistically is?
So I think it's huge. When you look at kind of high protein feeds, we had a panel earlier today on the issues with the protein supply, and the fish that we all like to eat have higher feed conversion ratios than livestock, but they don't really have higher protein conversion ratios when you hold feeds constant for protein requirements. And so when you look at 5 million tons a year of fish meal, it's shrinking at 1% a year. The comparable vegetable sources are another 4 to 5 million tons. And that's almost a fixed pie, and it's getting spread thinner and thinner across aquaculture species. And so if the industry is going to grow, if we are going to have a blue economy, Calista's positioned itself very well, I think, to deliver on that and to feed the growth of aquaculture.
you're not a scientist, and nor is Mark, but you're in a very science-driven business. How do you personally manage to keep pace with the people who do get science and do understand the science?
Yeah, it's been. I mean, it's something you have to spend time on. I think I go into the lab on a regular basis just to see what folks are up to, and that keeps me honest in understanding what's going on. And I also think, you know, we talked a lot about educating investors, and bringing them into a lab where they can see the fermentation happening hits home a lot on how the science works and what is actually happening behind the scenes.
And innovation has been a theme which people have talked about over the past couple of days. Scientists love to do science. Business people have to make those very conscious choices about which are the good projects and maybe which are not such good projects. Just describe how that exchange works within Callista.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, we're lucky in the sense that I think we have a commercially minded science group, especially our CTO. And so, you know, I have to say it's usually a collaborative discussion. But we are constantly evaluating the hundreds of opportunities that are available. I mean, we can make any molecule that's available in nature. And it's really, how do you prioritize that? And I think it's a complicated formula that includes technical feasibility, the price and value and market size of your target molecule, and also, you know, who the customers and potential partners are and how interested they are. And so, you know, it really does take, it is a team effort where you have to draw from a lot of sources. And at the same time, I think this is one of the reasons we've focused on FeedKind, which is single cell protein, because it's ready to go and the market is screaming out for it. And there are a lot of other, you know, opportunities that are farther along that will require some work within the organism, but this is one where the R&D is already done.
Accessing capital is always a tough thing, and bringing in investors and getting them to part with their money is always a tough thing. Do you think that America is just a bit better at doing that than other countries? Because there seem to be a constant stream of very successful companies in America which transition very quickly from startup to commercialization to success. What is it about America that enables that to happen?
Well, I think in Silicon Valley there is this ecosystem of financial capital available, and then also this group of investors that are very focused on what the next big thing is, on innovation, on what the new opportunities are. One of the things that we've actually found is in aquaculture, it's not a North American industry. I mean, the United States is lagging far behind Europe in aquaculture. And so we've actually had a lot more success with speaking with European folks who get the industry, who get the story, who understand what aquaculture can deliver to kind of the global protein system. And that's one of the ways we found Aquaspark, which is one of our investors and has definitely been an asset to the company. So I don't know if it's the United States as a whole, or as if it's pockets like, you know, Raleigh Research Triangle, Silicon Valley. You see the same thing kind of happening in Austin, where there's a tech hub, and it's also, I mean, it's the same size as Europe, so it's tough to compare the United States to France or the United States to England, just because it's such a bigger place.
Forgive me for saying this, but you look as if you're probably a little bit younger than some of the people who've been up on the stage today. What would be your advice to people who, like you, are, you know, recently got their MBA, and are thinking about a career in biotech, who maybe haven't got a biotech background? What would your advice to them be?
My advice would be to learn as much as you can about the industry. That the biggest challenge is, I mean, the business side is similar to the business in any other industry. The challenge is really understanding the science and being able to be incredibly fluent in it. And that's about spending time. That's about reading about companies. It's about going to conferences and talking to scientists and asking dumb questions. I think someone mentioned that earlier. Is the ability you have to ask basic, simple questions evaporates the longer you're in the industry. So you got to get those out pretty quickly.
And for you personally, where do you aspire to be? Is this now your home? Do you want to stay in biotech, or is your mind starting to take you off in different directions? By the way, your boss isn't listening, so you can be open about it.
I have to say
Dennis
that
is, she's in the audience, but anyway, you can be open.
I have to say that having worked in feed kind and single cell protein, it's really opened up the aquaculture industry a lot, and I think there's an opportunity to marry the abilities in biotech and the science in biotech with the animal production you see in aquaculture, and expanding that to new geographies, expanding that to new species, I think is really is a huge opportunity going forward.
Alan, thank you very much indeed. And by the way, the slightly older people up here on the stage, I put myself in that category as well, so I wasn't in any way trying to make a distinction. So, for both of you, thank you very, very much indeed. I think it's opportune that the two final people up on stage are from America, which has been the home for BioMarine this year. So, very best of luck with your enterprises in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
very much. Great conference.